Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Spiritual Living, Victoria. My name is Carrie Hunter, and I'm the Senior Minister at the Center, and it's a pleasure to welcome you here today. And I hope that you're having a great time as you're checking in on this, and that the joy of the Christmas season is just filling you with absolute delight in every way. I noticed, well, I think particularly this year more than any other in recent years, that wherever I go, there are signs that say peace on earth, and there are decorations with peace on them. And I have one in my own home, and it's something that's very meaningful to me. But I've been thinking, during this season that, there are a lot of things going on that aren't very peaceful. And of course, I'm thinking of the war in the Ukraine. And what I do know from our teaching is that we're not to focus on the bad stuff, we're to focus on the good stuff. And by that I mean, when I'm talking about the Ukraine, that we see the people of the Ukraine living in peace and in harmony, and their buildings are rebuilt, and they have electric power, and they have all of the fuel that they need, and that they have food and shelter and the love of family, and not to be dwelling upon the horrible things that are going on. I know a couple of weeks ago I found myself in tears just listening to some of the war crimes that have been committed. And I absolutely know that the way that we pray in our teaching is to see things already done. Because when we do that, we're planting a seed. We're planting a seed for peace. We're planting the seed for justice. We're planting a seed for love. And when we keep focusing upon that collectively, then that's what is growing. And it's difficult, when we know that so many people are just looking at all of the horrors that are going on and feeling the horrors. And I'm often saying to people, if they say, well, I'm worried about you for some reason or another, don't send me worry energy. Send me good energy. Send me happy energy, because that's what grows. And yet it's difficult for us to remember during such tough times. So as I was thinking about how to address this today, a Christmas carol came to mind. And this carol was written 60 years ago. Now, most of the carols that we think about were written hundreds of years ago. Most of the ones that we're really familiar with that are actual carols as opposed to Christmas songs. So I was thinking about a man named Paul Rainier. Was it Paul Rainier? And his wife, Gloria Shane. And the two of them lived in New York City, and they were songwriters. And they were commissioned by a record producer to write a new Christmas song 60 years ago. And they just didn't think that it was possible for them to do it. And particularly Paul, he was in a really, really difficult space emotionally, but so was his wife. And it was October of 1962. And if any of you remember what happened during that time, or if you're students of history, that was during the Cuban Missile Crisis. And during that time, there were people all over the globe who thought maybe they were going to be blown to smithereens, that it was going to be the obliteration of the human race. And for 19 days, people were concerned about this, more than concerned. They were living in terror. And many people were just glued to their television sets day and night. There wasn't the kind of news that we have today where everything is happening as we're seeing it, but there certainly was a lot of news commentary going on. And it was a very fearful time. And so Paul, I keep thinking that his first name isn't Paul, but I'm going to call him Paul today because I just don't have that information at hand. He went for a walk in New York City where he lived. And he walked along the streets and he saw moms pushing baby carriages, little children walking around. And that further depressed him. He just thought, these children are never going to have the chance to have a life. There is no hope for anything at all. And he sat down on a bench and he cried. And as he was sitting there, he continued to watch the mums go by with the babies, with little children. And he started to notice that the mums were chatting with one another, and they were happy, and that the babies were either sleeping or they were cooing happily, bright-eyed and filled with wonder. And the little children were skipping along, just excited about everything, not at all thinking about the awful things that might go on in the world, because they just didn't know they were going on. And the mothers weren't paying any attention to that. And as this was happening, all of a sudden, I think his name was Josh, not Paul. Let's go with Josh. That feels better right now. Josh was sitting watching this, and all of a sudden he kind of felt his heart just break open. And there was this love in his heart as he looked at these little children, and there was this joy in his heart, and he heard the words going through his head, "Do you hear what I hear?" And as he sat there over the next minutes, probably, I think it was less than a half hour, this entire song just was downloaded into his heart and mind. And it started out with, do you see what I see? But the carol, of course, is called "Do You Hear What I Hear?" And the very first verse of that, I have printed this off. The very first verse said the night wind to the little lamb, "Do you see what I see? Way up in the sky, little lamb. Do you see what I see? A star, dancing in the light, with a tail as long as a kite, with a tail as long as a kite." That would kind of suggest a comet. But more than that, what comes to mind when I think of that, the night wind to the little lamb. It's all about nature. It's the magnificence of nature. It's the beauty of nature, the wonder, the awe of how everything just unfolds beautifully and normally in every way. And the night wind isn't worried about obliteration, and the little lamb certainly isn't either. There's a lovely purity and innocence there in nature. And it's kind of not a warning. It's a message to us about how we can feel, how we can go about whatever we're doing in our lives and can be peaceful about it. Can be feeling the wonder and joy of the earth, can be in awe of the magnificence of everything around us. And then the second verse of the song goes like this. You can be pleased I'm not trying to sing it to you. Said the little lamb to the shepherd boy, "Do you hear what I hear? Do you hear what I hear? Ringing through the night, shepherd boy. Do you hear what I hear? A song, high above the trees, with a voice as big as the sea, with a voice as big as a sea." And so this to me speaks of the vibration of music, of an ancient longing in our souls to hear truth, to hear what's beautiful, to be listening for wonderful messages, to be listening for the truth, not listening to all of the negative things that might be around us, to be listening for the highest and best that could possibly be unfolding. And to know that, with that star up in the sky, that is announcing the birth of the Christ consciousness. And what that means is not the birth of a baby in a manger somewhere in Bethlehem, as beautiful as that story may be, but in fact, the awakening of spirit within us, the awakening. Well, actually, we're born with the Christ consciousness within us. We are each individualized expressions of God. The Spirit lives in, as, and through us. And as we become aware of it, as we become aware of this faith that we have in something so much greater than ourselves. There is the start of an awakening, the awakening of the Christ consciousness, meaning that we become awakened to the truth of who we are, to spirit having a human experience, to this power and presence that lives within us, not just today, not just some of the time, but always. It's always there, and we get to use it to create better lives for ourselves when we focus upon all that is good, when we focus upon the good things that we want to create with our lives and that we want to see all around us in our lives. And so the birth of the Christ consciousness basically is the awakening of it within us. It can be latent within us forever, until we move on to the next dimension. Or we can focus upon all that is good and true and beautiful, and it is awakened. And so as we think about this in nature, there's that music, that vibration of love, that vibration of peace, that vibration of a promise of peace on earth. Next verse. Said the shepherd boy to the mighty king, "Do you know what I know? In your palace, warm mighty king, do you know what I know?" And then a child shivers in the cold. Let us bring him silver and gold. Let us bring him silver and gold. And what's interesting about this to me is, the little boy doesn't go to his parents, doesn't go to his teachers. He just skips them entirely. He goes directly to the king. He's fearless. Little children are fearless. If the king is there, why not go and talk to the king? Why would there be an intermediary of any kind? A message to us, really, to go directly to source, directly to spirit, directly to the essence of who we are. I call it God, but you can call it anything you want. The universe, creator, source. It doesn't matter what you call it. It is there, and it is listening. And so we need to recover our lost innocence as adults, and to know that the King of Kings, or the kingdom, is within each one of us. To me, that's the metaphysical interpretation. And this song was not written so that we would have a metaphysical interpretation, but I really feel that the message that was given to the songwriter at the time, and it was one that had deep and profound messages of truth within it. And so the little boy talked to the mighty king. He was fearless. He told the mighty king what, in his purity and his innocence, the little boy's purity and innocence, what he knew. And then I thought a lot about the child shivering in the cold. What could be the meaning of that? Shivering in the cold, a little boy and a little child, a baby, shivering in the cold. And then what came to me is, when we lack faith, when we don't follow our spiritual calling, when we don't follow our spiritual paths, when we don't even think about it, when every day is just another day, when we don't feel connected to the divine that is within us, when we don't even think about it at all, we're like little children shivering in the cold. We have all kinds of fears. We have all kinds of concerns about what's going around us. We have anger that is not necessary at all. We buy into negativity. We tend to make up our own truths about things because we've stopped believing. We've stopped having faith in the Almighty, in the powerful presence within. And so we shiver in the cold. But when we open up, absolutely open up to the beauty and wonder of life and to spirit within, knowing that we've been given this gift to use, to create healing in our lives, to create love, to create abundant lives, to create joyful lives. When we open to this, something magnificent happens, as it did with the songwriter. His heart burst open and he was filled with joy. And the final verse said, the king to the people everywhere, listen to what I say. Listen to what I say. Pray for peace, people everywhere. Listen to what I say. A child, sleeping in the night, we will bring him goodness and light. We will bring him goodness and light. Goodness and light, goodness and light. We will bring him goodness and light. And so this is our invitation to bring goodness and light to the world, not just at Christmas time, but all year long. Not forgetting ever the truth of who we are, not forgetting that we have the power to bring goodness and light into our own lives and into the lives of others. And as I was thinking about this the other day, I was remembering that beautiful story in 1914 in Belgium. For a stretch of 150 miles, the Allied forces on one side of no man's land and the German forces on the other. And it was Christmas. And from out of the trenches on the German side came a voice singing Silent Night in German. And the Allied forces started to sing it in English. And soon, when you consider this, think of this, for 150 miles, the song being taken up by the soldiers in the trenches along that long stretch of land. And the fighting stopped. In some places it stopped for only one day. In others it stopped for as much as a week. But what happened was that the German soldiers and the Allied soldiers started to crawl out of the trenches onto no man's land, which is that space of land between the trenches where they could claim the bodies of their loved ones or their mates, and could recover some who were wounded. Anyway, there in no man's land, there was no war for either a day or for a week, depending upon where you were or where they were. And the soldiers exchanged food, and they played football, and they gave one another little gifts, unusual gifts, but all that they had, buttons off their uniforms, something to exchange. And then their commanding officers ordered them to go back and to fight again. And I think how difficult that must be, to start shooting at people that you've just shared food with, people you've given gifts to, people you've played football with, people with whom you've sung Silent Night. And I would like to think, in my innocence long ago, I wanted to think that the war stopped then, but it didn't. The war began again, and it went on for another 4 years. And one of the amazing stories that came out of it was the German soldier who began to sing Silent Night and who rose up out of the trenches on the German side was recognized by one of the Brits who was among the Allied forces on the other side. And that Brit had lived in Germany for a few years, and the man who was singing Silent Night in German had been his barber. There's so many amazing stories, and we need to remember that peace is possible, not just for one day, not just for a week, but for 1,000 years, forever and ever. It has been promised to us, but it is up to us. It is up to each one of us to refuse to fight, to refuse to hate, to refuse to carry hatred in our hearts, to allow the love of the Christ child to flow and to grow and to send it out brightly into the world. Bless you all. Have a beautiful Christmas season, and I look forward to seeing you again in the new year. I'm going to be away for a couple of weeks taking holidays, so I'll see you January 1st. Love and many blessings to you all, and may this season be joyful for each one of you, and let us carry peace and love in our hearts. And so it is.